This video about Warhammer 40,000 tournaments is itself sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 tournament. Everwinter is a gaming convention held December 8th through 10th in Massachusetts. More about them later on in the video and at wickeddicey.com/Everwinter. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. We're taking undefeated players from GT and major level events for the past weekend, this being the weekend of October 21st and 22nd, and breaking down their lists. And we had another banger of a weekend. We have tons and tons of event results to talk about, and while we don't have any enormous, huge events this week, we do have a couple large major events that went down, including Malmo Wargaming and the SoCal Open. We also had the release of the new Space Marine Codex last week, which is now becoming legal for events this week. We're going to be discussing some lists using detachments and the rules changes from that codex. As always, if you enjoy my Warhammer 40,000 content and videos like this, please drop a like on the video, subscribe on the channel. The YouTube stuff that we all talk about all the time, forever, and it will never change. And let's dive into the breakdown. Now, this week we did see a lot of diversity within the metagame, but we have seen Aeldari ousted as the #1 faction. Previously, Eldar have been dominant with the most undefeated results almost every week, basically unbroken since the beginning of the edition, and now that is starting to change with Chaos Space Marines taking the throne. I, for one, welcome our new spiky overlords. Chaos Space Marines had 6 undefeated results this week, including the Mini GT Alea Leda, Malmo Wargaming, Battlefield Birmingham, 2 results in the top 3 of SoCal Open, and the Toronto Fall Open. Aeldari still remain at the top with 4 results, 2 placements at Malmo Wargaming, Alba GT, and Gothic Games Canterbury. However, Orks are nipping at their heels and actually tied for number of undefeated placements at Battlefield Birmingham, the Factorum GT, the Isuaran event, and the Hiveslayer GT. From there, we see a ridiculously diverse allotment of undefeated lists from a wide variety of other factions. Now, we do see that new Space Marine Codex coming out a little bit in Space Marine results, and Space Marines together put up 4 undefeated placements for this weekend. However, once we break those down into individual sub-factions, each of those are from a separate sub-faction, which actually does show a little bit of flexibility within the Space Marine roster itself. That is 1 result from Ultramarines, 1 from Blood Angels, 1 from Space Wolves, and 1 from Black Templars. We also saw undefeated results from Tau Empire, Necrons, Chaos Knights, AdMech, and GSC. So let's go down the list and talk about lists from each of these factions. As the year grows colder and there's not but the icy nip of Jack Frost outdoors, what's better than to curl up with a hot mug of cocoa next to the roar of indoor central heating and one of the largest miniature gaming events of the year? Everwinter is one of the many amazing events presented by Wicked Dicey. Veterans of this channel might recognize some of Wicked Dicey's past events like Everwinter 2022 and Ironweld, which both supported the channel and I covered on stream. They were amazing events, and Wicked Dicey always puts on an amazing show, but this year they are coming back bigger and better than ever. Everwinter is a cross-denominational miniature gaming extravaganza now at a new location in Waltham, Massachusetts. This gaming convention features competitive play for a frankly dizzying number of miniature games, including a full-size Age of Sigmar GT, a Star Wars Legion Championship, and events for other games such as Malifaux, Infinity, X-Wing, Armada, Conquest, Song of Ice and Fire, Middle-earth strategy battle game, and many more, including, let's be honest, the one that you're probably the most interested in, a full-scale Warhammer 40k major. Last year, Everwinter brought together close to 100 40k players for their major, and this year promises to be even bigger. If competition isn't quite your style, there is also a variety of casual and narrative events to choose from, as well as a variety of board games and hobby workshops so you can hone those paintbrush skills. I couldn't be more excited for Everwinter 2023, and I will be there all weekend. So please come and join me December 8th through 10th at the Westham Waltham, Boston, and head on over to wickeddicey.com/Everwinter for more information and to get your tickets today. I'll see you on the battlefield, gamers. We'll start with Chaos Space Marines and talk about James Carmona's list from the SoCal Open. This was the largest event of the weekend at 190 players, and James was able to go 6-0 with his Black Legion style Chaos Space Marines. This was running Abaddon the Despoiler, a Dark Commune with the Mark of Nurgle to get access to Dark Obscuration, as well as Harken Worldclaimer. Harken Worldclaimer is a really interesting include. This guy has been seeing play on and off in a lot of Chaos Space Marine lists, and he is pretty sweet just for his ability to make Raptors hit wildly above their weight class. He himself is a pretty impressive profile. He has a single ranged attack, which also doubles as a melee profile with his big cool spear. That is sustained hits D3, but only one attack, both in the shooting and fight phases. However, it has the lance characteristic, so it is +1 to wound, and if you get that 6 to hit and trigger its sustained hits, then it can potentially be doing a lot of damage at AP3 for 3 damage. He also then has a precision talon attack with 6 attacks, hitting on 2s at strength 5, AP2 for 2 damage. So Harken himself is no slouch, but the other benefit you get from him, impact hits with his Raptor unit. He grants his Raptor unit a Hammer of Wrath effect, a 4+ mortal wound, after completing a successful charge for each model in the Raptor unit. However, it's important to note that it is better than similar Hammer of Wrath effects like on Space Marine Assault Marines, because you roll for each model in the Raptor unit, not each model that you have an engagement range of the target. So, in the full unit of 10 Raptors, which is included in James Carmona's list, with Harken Worldclaimer in it, you're going to be rolling 11 dice, averaging 5 to 6 mortal wounds on the charge before Harken even gets to swing with those impressive melee attacks. He also has a Battle Shock aura, forcing Battle Shock checks on enemies that are below starting strength in the Battle Shock step of their command phase. This is the best time to be forcing Battle Shock checks on your opponent, because that means if they fail them and they don't insane bravery before they take the check, they're going to lose control of objectives, they're going to lose the ability to use stratagems on that unit for the entire battle round until their next command phase. This is basically the Chaos Knight subfaction ability wrapped up into Harken. Now, it also stacks in most formats with the normal Battle Shock step, Battle Shock, if you're below half strength. So a unit below half strength within 6 inches of Harken will be forced to take 2 Battle Shock checks and pass both of them in order to remain unbattle shocked. We then have a Cultist Mob to obsec some objectives, a big unit of Nurgle Accursed Cultists for that Dark Commune to attach into, a 5-model Terminator squad, likely for Abaddon to sit into and act as a bodyguard for him. A lot of times we see the 10-model Terminator squad with Abaddon, but honestly, that's oftentimes overkill. It's very cool in a big battleship unit, but Abaddon himself is largely enough attacks to kill almost anything in the game, and so the Terminators themselves are mostly just ablative wounds for him, and with as difficult as they are to kill, especially since Abaddon unlocks the ability to Dark Obscurate them if you really need to, you don't usually need 10. We then have 2 Forge Fiends, one Chaos Undivided to get Profane Zeal, one with Mark of Nurgle, and that is supported by a Nurgle Hellbrute. The Hellbrute is going to give the Forge Fiends and any other unit within 6 inches of it the effects of both Dark Pact results when they make a Dark Pact check. This means that the Nurgle Forge Fiend, if it's within 6 inches of the Hellbrute and chooses sustained hits on its Dark Pact, it's going to be unlocking its critical hits on 5 thanks to the Mark of Nurgle. Because it's critical hitting on 5s and the Hellbrute then also grants it lethal hits and sustained, it's going to be getting lethal and sustained on 5s into potentially devastating wounds if you decide to overcharge its weapons. This also works for any of the other units in the army, including the Noise Marine unit and Obliterators, and potentially even the close combat weapons once you get stuck in. The Noise Marines are another include that we're seeing a lot of Chaos Space Marine lists pivot towards. They're a relatively cheap unit that gets an incredibly strong heavy weapon in their Blastmaster, not to mention the fact that their Sonic Blasters are assault weapons, allowing them to advance and perform actions, making them a pretty useful just utility unit with some pretty serious damage output. Overall, there's a lot of flexibility within Chaos Space Marine lists. Most of the time, they have modules and components that they're going to be assembling lists out of, be it Chosen Bricks, Accursed Cultists, Forge Fiends, or Obliterators, and you basically will just be mix and matching whichever combination of those that you want for your Chaos Space Marine army. All of those are highly effective, and you can take them in basically whatever combination that you want. In this case, you also see a little bit of spice with things like the Hellbrute and Harken Worldclaimer and the Raptors, and it's cool to see that stuff on the table as well. Now moving on to Aeldari, we'll move over to the other large major of the weekend, the Malmo Wargaming event. At this event, Joel Larson was one of the 2 Aeldari players undefeated at the end of 5 rounds, going 5-0. And at this event, interestingly, we've seen a little bit of a pivot back to an old style of Eldar rocking the Incarn. We saw a lot of Eldar players drop the Incarn over the last couple of weeks, but both undefeated Eldar players at Malmo Wargaming did take the Incarn in their armies. One of them was backing it up with a Wraithguard brick. Joel Larson, however, was taking it with the Avatar of Cain. This list included an Autarch Wayleaper as the Warlord to generate command points, the aforementioned Avatar of Cain as an enormously difficult to kill mid-board brawler. That's backed up by a Farseer who can put Fortune on the Avatar for -1 to be wounded. The Farseer has the Phoenix Gem so he can respawn after being killed, which is important because he doesn't have a bodyguard unit within the army. This is pretty common for Eldar lists. The bodyguards for Farseers are usually pretty bad, things like Guardian Defenders. So instead of spending points on a whole unit of guys that are just going to be blasted away by indirect fire anyway, we might as well disincentivize your opponent from attacking the Farseer by taking the Phoenix Gem and allowing him to respawn if they decide to commit in to kill him. Not to mention the fact that you have Fate Dice and you have defensive stratagems. Farseers are actually kind of hard to get to grips with to begin with. We then have the Incarn aforementioned that is backed up by a ton of MSU utility units. We do have 2 Night Spinners to slow down enemy units, potentially kill light enemy units, and allow the Incarn to jump to their position, then charge more heavily defended enemies later on in the same turn. This is an Alpha Strike that Eldar are incredibly good at delivering. They can also then play aggressively that turn, and if any of their other small units get killed, the Incarn will just teleport out of danger after wreaking havoc in your opponent's deployment zone during their own shooting phase. We then have 2 units of Shadow Specters, 3 Warwalkers with Bright Lances, and 1 unit of Warp Spiders. A lot of really classic Eldar includes a lot of little tiny units that are excellent at triggering the Incarn's teleport, scoring secondary objectives themselves, and also just making the most use of unparalleled foresight. They're just going to be all over the table, difficult to get to grips with, phantasming around, and basically impossible to stop. That moves us on to the next faction that had multiple undefeated Orks. This time we're going to be talking about Battlefield Birmingham and Richie Ballon's Ork Watch Tribe. Well, a lot of the Ork lists focused on the pretty classic transport-focused Ork composition that we've been seeing recently that runs tons of trucks and battle wagons, fills them up with boys and specialist infantry, and then blitzes them up the table, pins your opponent in their deployment zone, and scores massive points, which is one of the reasons that Orks are so successful right now. This list is incredibly hard to stop if you don't have very, very good anti-dedicated transport technology. And this list goes all in on that game plan. Richie's list was running Ghazghkull Thraka, the great big boss himself, plus 3 war bosses with power claws, 2 units of 10 Beast Snaga Boys, 3 units of 10 Standard Boys, 3 units of 10 Gretchen, a Burna Boys unit, alongside 1 unit of Mega Knobs for Ghazghkull to join. All of the battle wagons in the list are equipped with hard cases, so they can't transport Ghazghkull, so he might need a little bit of a bodyguard to soak some wounds for him. The interesting thing about Ghazghkull in these lists, however, is that he himself is so difficult to kill, a lot of your opponent's anti-tank would have to be dedicated to shooting at him to try to mitigate his aggression. And if you're doing that, you're not shooting at any of the trucks with boys inside. It's a no-win situation for the other player. We also have 2 units of Storm Boys for their Alpha Strike ability and their utility, alongside 2 battle wagons, just the hard case upgrade on those guys, and 5 trucks, a total of 7 transports for all of this horde of infantry to go inside, alongside all of the war bosses and the Burna Boys, just running right up the middle, scoring a bunch of points and hoping that you can't kill them all before they just crump you right in the head. This is a very spicy take on what is a pretty classic Orks archetype. It is cool to see Ghazghkull Thraka getting back on the table and being taken in Ork lists. It's a bit of a coin flip, I think, whether a competitive Ork composition will include him, so it's cool to see a list with him go 5-0. We also saw a similar one from James Ball over at the Factorum GT, also running Ghazghkull Thraka. Now that moves us on to the gauntlet of Space Marine factions that we have to talk about today, starting with classic Codex compliant, in fact, the most Codex compliant chapter in the game, Ultramarines, which went 6-0 at the Dragon's Lair GT. This list was piloted by Jared Gomez and ran a classic Gladius Task Force style. Now, the event did use the updated Space Marine Codex, so the other detachments were open to be used, but most of the lists that I saw there were still running Gladius Task Force. This list was running a Lieutenant with Fire Discipline, that's the renamed Bolter Discipline, to give exploding 5s during Devastator Doctrine and sustained hits 1, so you're going to be able to trigger both the Lieutenant's lethal hits and the sustained hits from the Fire Discipline on a 5+. We also have a second Lieutenant equipped with Artificer Armor, a little bit of a spicy include, a Lieutenant in Phobos Armor, alongside a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, the Lone Operative Reroll 1s Lieutenant to give a little bit of wound rerolls back into the army, and the great man himself, Marneus Calgar.
I cast fist!
The list was running a 6-model Blade Guard veteran squad, likely for Marneus Calgar and the Artificer Arbor Lieutenant to join into. Then the Lieutenant, giving them lethal hits, greatly improves their damage output because those Blade Guard veterans are only strength 5, so a lot of times they're relying on either the lethal hits or Honor the Chapter. We then have one Brutalis Dreadnought, another beneficiary of the Assault Doctrine to advance and charge, 2 Gladiator Lancers to add some backline shooting, a big Hellblaster squad, that's where the Lieutenant with Fire Discipline is gonna be. We have one Inceptor squad with Plasma Exterminators, one Incursor squad to add +1 to hit. That can combo with the Hellblaster squad pretty well because you can be hitting on 2s and you don't lose too much efficiency by just rerolling all of your non-5-up critical hits with Oaths of Moment. So you can try to fish for the lethals and sustains, alongside one Scout squad and a Whirlwind to add a little bit of support and harassment to the army. This is a pretty classic build. It's cool to see that we're rocking the Hellblaster squads instead of the classic Aggressor build with Fire Discipline and the Biologus Apothecary. But the Hellblasters I can definitely see not necessarily needing wound rerolls to get the maximum damage from Oaths of Moment. The Hellblasters, however, have a high base strength and AP, so they don't really need that much help in order to deal damage outside of the old version of Oaths of Moment. The interesting thing about this list is that there's very little delivery for the big bricks. I think a lot of this stuff is either going to be hiding in an advantageous position or strategic reserving off the table edge and then rapid ingressing. Marneus Calgar off the side is pretty good with rapid ingress because he can go into a defensive position and then with his advance and charge still move pretty quickly to get stuck into his opponent. The downside there is that he's not on the battlefield to generate you command points, so it might be that he's going to be standing on the table and threatening the middle of the table while the Hellblasters are in reserve to pop in and blow something up whenever you need them to. So we talked about blue, let's talk about red. That moves us on to Blood Angels at the SoCal Open, where Ruben Zhao played a Gladius Task Force Blood Angels list. This list was running an Apothecary Biologus with Fire Discipline. This is going to unlock the Aggressor combo we've talked about many times before, and I have a whole video about. Obviously, with the Oaths of Moment change, it doesn't reroll its wound rolls, but it does get those lethal hits on 5s, and the wound rolls from the pistols, at least, are being rerolled because they're twin-linked. We then also have a Tech Marine at their new 55-point cost, which is incredibly efficient. A big Centurion Assault Squad, that's cool to see, alongside an Eradicator Squad, 2 Inceptor Squads, one with Assault Bolters, one with Plasma Exterminators, an Incursor Squad, an Infiltrator Squad, a Land Raider, just a standard Land Raider potentially for the Centurion Assault Squad to hop into, a Repulsor Executioner to add some backline shooting, a Scout Squad, 1 Stormspeeder Thunderstrike, a Whirlwind, alongside a Librarian Dreadnought. Now that Librarian Dreadnought gives you a teleport effect on a 2+ in your movement phase. You can pick an infantry unit up and immediately deep strike it, so you can start units like the Aggressor Squad on the table. They don't necessarily need a delivery system or a transport. They can literally sit on the back edge of your deployment zone where they're not in danger from anything, and you can pick them up and redeploy them on a 2+ just by themselves. A little idiosyncratically, Blood Angels are incredibly good at delivering ranged attacks right now. While they don't have the same level of buffs that other sub-factions do, the Librarian Dreadnought alone gives the faction so much maneuverability that it's almost impossible to hide from their aggression. Aggressors are going to be able to teleport around. Units like Hellblasters and Devastator Squads are going to be able to hop around the table as well, and that Librarian Dreadnought is fueling all of this mobility. Definitely makes Blood Angels a force to be reckoned with, if it is a little bit of a flavor fail. Now that was Asanta Space Wolves and what might be the greatest name for a 40k GT ever, the Autumn Donut Singles. I love a good donut. At this event, Andrei Ostrovsky went 5-0 with Space Wolves. Now as a caveat, this list did play pre-new codex. It was still running now legended units and points values from before the codex was released. I think this style of list might be being played in Stormlance Detachment now if we are playing post-codex, but I will run through the list very quickly. This is, again, a Gladius task force running Herald Deathwolf, 2 Wolfguard battle leaders on Thunderwolves, alongside a Thunderwolf Lord with Artificer armor. We had 2 Intercessor squads in the battle line, which is kind of cute. I like these little guys. It's been a while since we've seen regular Intercessors on the table, but they do have objective secured, which is pretty good for an aggressive army like this one. We had 1 Attack Bike squad with a Multi-Melta, 1 Devastator squad with 4 Las Cannons, 2 Eradicator squads, 5 Fenrisian Wolves for some utility, 1 unit of Inceptors with Assault Bolters, 2 Redemptor Dreadnoughts with Plasma Cannons, alongside 2 big 6-man bricks of Thunderwolf Cavalry, these ones rocking Storm Shields alongside their heirloom weapons. Now that moves us on to the last Space Marine list that we have to talk about this week. This was TJ Spaeth from the Warzone 3 Taverns event. This one was running a new detachment out of the new codex, an Ironstorm detachment in, interestingly, Black Templars. Now, Black Templars do have a huge benefit over other Space Marine vehicle lists. It sounds a little bit weird, but they get multi-meltas on almost all of their Primaris vehicles. At one point, Games Workshop released a multi-melta in a Black Templars upgrade kit for Primaris vehicles, and so they just have to put multi-meltas on all your impulsors and stuff. That's great. They do cost a couple extra points for the multi-melta, but the massive number of additional attacks that having multi-meltas across all of your vehicles gets usually is enough to make Black Templars vehicle lists actually pretty effective. This list was running 2 Tech Marines, one with a target augury web. This grants lethal hits to vehicles within 6 inches. The other one with Adept of the Omnissiah. This allows you to, after rolling a saving throw, if it is failed, turn the damage of the attack to 0. A little bit of an interesting interaction with this one. If your opponent has damage bonuses, stuff like the Melta ability, Adept of the Omnissiah and similar rules will actually not negate the Melta damage. You replace the damage of the weapon of the attack characteristic before additional bonuses are calculated. So you replace, if it's for example a D6 Melta 2 attack, you replace the D6 with a 0, and then the Melta 2 gets added on top, and you still take 2 damage. Bit of a weird one. We then have 5 Crusader squads. These guys all running Las Cannons and Melta guns. We saw a similar variety of Black Templars last week using these mass, super cheap Crusader squads. We have 1 Ballistus Dreadnought alongside 2 Gladiator Lancers, again, with that cheeky multi-melta on top, 2 Gladiator Reapers, 1 Invictor Tactical Warsuit, 1 Redemptor Dreadnought, 1 Scout Squad, a Stormspeeder Thunderstrike, and a Calidus and Eversor Assassin. So no transports for the Crusader squads this time, but we are running tons and tons of vehicles to benefit from those synergies. The Gladiator Reapers are an interesting include in the Ironstorm detachment. You can use Mercy as weakness when those Reapers target a damaged enemy unit, and you do have enough random multi-melta shots, Icarus launchers, stuff to do 1 plink wound into almost anything. That gives an attacking vehicle sustained 1 and critical 5s, and Gladiator Reapers, when they're attacking an infantry unit, get sustained 2 instead. Alongside the lethal hits from the target augury web. That means a Gladiator Reaper could be firing its twin rotary cannons from the top, getting reroll hits from Oaths of Moment, critical 5s for sustain 2 and lethal, so those 5-ups turn into 2 additional hits on top of 1 automatic wound. You can then, with Twin Linked, reroll those sustained hits and try to get devastating wounds from the Reapers. They're incredibly strong anti-infantry guns. They're still pretty good into tanks because they do have devastating wounds in Twin Linked, but obviously less reliable. It is against infantry that they start to really put out immense amounts of damage. The Ironstorm detachment has a ton of play with. The combination of Mercy as weakness and the target augury web makes almost any vehicle in the detachment hyper lethal, and things like the Gladiator Lancers with built-in Aquilon optic rerolls for their laser destroyer, plus the rerolls on top of that from the detachment ability, giving everything in the army 1 dice reroll per phase, means that they are super reliable and super good at putting down long-range damage down the table. This list is incredibly strong. The mass multi-meltas on everything and the Crusader squads to make use of that detachment roll with the las cannons also helps a ton. Now let's round it out with some other factions that went 5-0, starting with Tau Empire at the Fun and Games GT, where Trent Mazer took them to a 5-0 record. This list was running Commander Farsight, a Cold Star Commander battlesuit with the Exemplar of the Kauyan, alongside a second Cold Star Commander with Precision of the Patient Hunter. All the commanders today, every commander. We're running a unit of Broadside battlesuits, 1 6-man Crisis battlesuit team with all Cyclic Ion Blasters, alongside 2 3-man Crisis battlesuit teams, again with all Cyclic Ion Blasters, 2 Ghost Kill battlesuits, a unit of Crude Hounds for support, 3 units of Tetras to guide and give rerolls to those Crisis Battlesuit teams, and a unit of Vespid Stingwings. We do see a little bit of a differentiation in the character loadout of these Tau lists between the Crisis Commander with Precision versus a Cold Start Commander versus Commander Farsight or Commander Shadow Sun. Those are usually pretty variable, but the rest of Tau lists are kind of set at this point. Almost all of them are running 2 to 3 Tetra units, some utility units alongside 2 to 3 Crisis Battlesuit teams and Broadside Battlesuits, and it's pretty classic. Now, continuing with the Xenos trend, that moves us back to my favorite event of the weekend, the Autumn Donut Singles. This is where Alex Voronkov went 4-0-1 with Necrons, going undefeated, but only with 1 draw on his record. This was running Enrikir the Traveler alongside a Sempiternal Weave Catacomb Command Barge. These guys grant +1 objective control in an aura, so having the Sempiternal Weave for a 4+ feel no pain on them makes them super difficult to kill, and then allow them to play very aggressively and project that onto units like Lich Guard, who are difficult to kill but low OC, that allows you to shore up their OC and hold down the objectives even against enemy high OC troops. We then have 1 Chronomancer with a Veil of Darkness, a Catan Shard of the Deceiver, Illuminor Seraz, Imhotep the Stormlord, man, like every special character this time around, holy crap, and a Locust Lord with the Hypermaterial Ablator for stealth and potential cover on his unit, alongside another Technomancer with a Canoptic Cloak for a lone operative. We have 10 Immortals in the battle line, alongside a Canoptic Reanimator, 3 Scarab Swarms, 1 unit of Cryptothralls, 1 unit of Death Marks for utility and deep strike, a big unit of 10 Flayed Ones for some infiltrating action, a big Lich Guard unit. These guys running Hyperfade Swords and Dispersion Shields. That's the unit that's going to be protecting the Catacomb Command Barge, and he's going to be granting them that +1 OC, alongside a unit of 6 Locust Destroyers for the Locust Lord to attach into. Pretty wild list. This one's running a ton of special characters, which you don't always see around, but we do have the Immortal Brick that can attach 1 of those, alongside the big unit of Lich Guard that can play a little bit more aggressively. So lots of board control, lots of maneuverability with the Infiltrators, the Veil of Darkness on the Chronomancer to teleport 1 of those units around, alongside the Locust Destroyers that are probably strategic reserving off the side if I had to make a guess, because their range is relatively short by itself, and that allows them to play the range game with the Hypermaterial Ablator to keep them alive, all the while that big brick of Lich Guard is bearing down the middle and stealing primary away from you. Now, similarly, at the Toronto Fall Open, Dustin Henshaw also finished the event with only a draw on his record, in addition to 5 wins. Dustin was running Genestealer Cults in a very character-centric list, running 2 Keller Morphs, a Nexos, double Primus, 3 Reductus Saboteurs, and a Sanctus, alongside 1 unit of 10 Acolyte Hybrids, 4 units of 5 Acolyte Hybrids, 2 units of 20 Neophyte Hybrids, all of these running Seismic Cannons, one of them running Webbers, the other one with Grenade Launchers, 2 Goliath Trucks to ferry some of those Acolyte Hybrids around in order to allow them to deliver their demolition charges, plus 1 unit of Aberrants, only 5 in this unit, interestingly, and a single Achilles Ridge Runner with a Survey Augur to give Ignore Cover and +1 AP to a unit that it shoots at. Because the units coming out of reserve already get Ignore Cover, you don't necessarily need it for the units that aren't already on the table. And the Reductus Saboteurs, having a 24-inch range indirect fire weapon, get a huge benefit from Ignore Cover and +1 AP. Because they're indirect fire, they're already going to be granting their opponent cover, so if the Achilles Ridge Runner shoots them first, you can put 3 sets of Reductus Saboteur blasts into them and actually do some significant damage to infantry. Pretty cool list, especially alongside all the lone operative and independent characters. Now that moves us on to the MonsterCon GT, where Charlie Kang brought Chaos Knights to a 5-0 record. This list is a pretty classic War Dog spam. We're just walking the dogs today. We have got 1 War Dog Stalker with Aura of Terror, so he can lock in objectives, 6 War Dog Brigands, 5 War Dog Carnivores, alongside an allied contingent of 2 units of 3 Nurglings, and the Changeling to add some utility and secondary objective scoring into the list. Pretty classic Chaos Knights build with a ton of War Dogs in it. These things have been good for basically the entirety of the edition, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Now, last but certainly not least, that moves us on over to the Alba GT, where Matei Cesar took Adeptus Mechanicus to a 5-0 record. This list was running 3 Tech Priest Manipuli, one of them with Master Annihilator, one with the Omni Sterilizer. That's backed up by 3 units of Skitarii Vanguard to turn on the Armies battle line synergies, 1 Scorpius Dune Rider to house one of those Vanguard units and allow it to push up the table, get its anti-OC aura online to steal enemy objectives, 3 individual Iron Strider Ballistari, 2 units of Taraxi Skystalkers for a little bit of secondary objective control, 1 unit of Sikarian Infiltrators, 1 unit of Cerberus Raiders, 3 individual Sidonian Dragoons, alongside the classic bastion of firepower that Adeptus Mechanicus are hanging their hat on right now, 3 units of Cataphron Breachers for those Tech Priest Manipuli to enter into. Tons of anti-vehicle shooting with these guys. They get rerolls to hit from being nearby the battle line units. They can even return fire if engaged in a gunfight. And there are not too many armies that can beat them in a straight up duel. They're a little bit slow and unmaneuverable, but once they get line of sight to you, it's all ogre. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this weekend. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite. Thank you so much to everybody who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are great and I love you. Remember to be classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.